What happens when a woman the world mocks refuses to shrink and instead stands taller than ever? They laughed at Jeanine Pirro in court, but they didn't know who she really was. Stay tuned, because by the end of the story, they won't be laughing, and you'll be cheering. The courtroom was alive with tension, the kind that crawls under your skin and tightens every nerve. The jury sat stiff in their seats, eyes darting between the defense team and the prosecution's table. Jeanine Pirro, the seasoned prosecutor with a reputation for toughness, stood at the heart of it all. Her tailored suit, impeccably pressed, and the air of quiet confidence she wore like armor, seemed to give her an undeniable presence. Yet in this room, she wasn't just battling a defendant. She was fighting a larger battle, one against skepticism, derision, and the mocking whispers of the very people who should have been on her side. Her opponent, a high-powered defense lawyer with sharp features and a sharper tongue, flashed a smirk as he walked to his side of the courtroom. His suit was custom-tailored, and his slick-back hair added to the arrogance that oozed from him like cologne. As he delivered his opening statement, his eyes flicked toward Jeanine, just for a second, but it was enough to see the gleam of condescension. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice dripping with superiority, "you'll soon see that this case is built on nothing more than assumptions and theatrics, a final, desperate attempt by a prosecutor who is grasping at straws." The words were sharp, aimed to undermine, to diminish. But they didn't stop there. In the corner of the room, a few of the media reporters exchanged knowing glances. One of them, a well-known critic of Jeanine's career, smirked, her voice a low murmur to the person beside her. "She's way over her head. The days of big speeches are long gone." A few members of the jury shifted uncomfortably, but some couldn't resist the subtle sneers they threw Jeanine's way. A few even chuckled under their breath, as if to say, "She's just a relic of the past. Outdated, ineffective." The energy in the room became electric with mockery, the kind that bites into the heart of even the most resilient person. Jeanine stood firm, her eyes scanning the room as if she could feel the weight of every doubting glance. The crowd didn't understand her, didn't know the fire that burned quietly beneath her exterior. But Jeanine was used to being underestimated, used to proving people wrong. She had seen worse. She had faced more daunting battles. And she wasn't about to let a room full of skeptics or a smug defense attorney stand in her way. Her jaw tightened slightly. They would learn. She wasn't here to fight for a win. She was here to make sure justice was served. The tension in the courtroom thickened like a storm cloud, heavy with unspoken judgment. Jeanine Pirro stood at the prosecution table, her every move calculated, every word chosen with precision. The defense attorney, still grinning from his earlier remark, prepared to launch another salvo. His voice echoed through the room, his words designed to tear away at her credibility, to paint her as an outdated figure in a world that had long since moved beyond her. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his eyes glinting with confidence, "we have all witnessed the dramatic spectacle this trial has become. But let's not forget, justice is not about grandstanding. It's about facts. And the facts in this case?" He paused for dramatic effect, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make the jury squirm. "They're just not there." He shot a glance at Jeanine, his smirk returning as if he'd just delivered a crushing blow. "Our esteemed prosecutor here, she's great at making noise. But as far as facts, well, not so much." A chuckle bubbled up from a few members of the jury, and the defense lawyer soaked it in, knowing he'd struck a nerve. The murmurs spread like wildfire, the courtroom alive with whispers. Jeanine's sharp gaze flicked from one face to another, but she held her ground. Her back straightened, but the way they were looking at her, like she was some relic from a bygone era, cut deeper than she would admit. The defense team exchanged knowing glances. One of them leaned over to whisper to the lead attorney. He nodded, eyes twinkling with disdain, and turned back toward the jury, leaning in a little too closely. "Look at her, ladies and gentlemen. She's trying to convince you that this case is something worth your time. But honestly, it's clear. This is all she has left. Her reputation, her name. But as you'll see, that doesn't count for much in the face of actual evidence." A few more chuckles rippled through the room. Some members of the jury shifted uneasily, but others seemed to take delight in the dissection of Jeanine's career. It wasn't just the defense attorney now. It was the entire room. The audience, the reporters, even the judge's gaze seemed to hold a hint of skepticism. The mocking tone was contagious. Jeanine's hand tightened around the edge of the table. She could feel the weight of their judgment, 1,000 tiny needles of doubt pricking at her. But instead of crumbling, something inside her hardened. They didn't know her. They didn't know what she was capable of. The jury didn't realize it yet, but this wasn't a battle for a conviction. It was a battle for respect, and Jeanine had every intention of earning it, no matter how much they tried to tear her down. The courtroom was electric, crackling with tension. Jeanine Pirro, standing tall at the front of the room, could feel the eyes of the jury boring into her, their skepticism hanging in the air like a heavy fog. Every breath seemed to amplify the noise of the mocking whispers, the low murmurs from the defense table, the occasional chuckle from the audience. She was used to pressure, to being underestimated, but this felt different. It wasn't just the defense attorney's jabs anymore. It was the collective sneer of the entire room, from the media to the judge, and worst of all, the jury. As the defense lawyer strutted across the floor, weaving a narrative of doubt and ridicule, Jeanine's stomach tightened. He was a master at manipulating the room, playing the audience like a seasoned performer. With each word, he chipped away at her credibility, turning her into a caricature, an outdated figure desperate to keep hold of power. But Jeanine didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She couldn't afford to. The defense lawyer was nearing the climax of his performance now. He was winding up for the big punch, the moment when he would have the jury fully on his side. His voice dropped, dripping with false sincerity as he turned to face Jeanine directly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, pausing for effect, "what you have here is not a prosecutor seeking justice. What you have here is a desperate woman clinging to a case she knows is already lost. She's out of ideas, out of evidence, and out of time." He let the words hang in the air, letting them sink into the minds of the jury. Jeanine's heart raced, but outwardly she was calm. She knew what he was doing, playing to the crowd, getting them to doubt her, to question her every move. But she also knew something he didn't. The best way to shut him down wasn't with words. Without a single word, she moved. Slowly, deliberately, Jeanine began to unbutton her robe. The fabric, once so familiar and authoritative, slid off her shoulders. The courtroom fell silent as everyone in the room instinctively leaned forward, unsure of what she was doing. Jeanine's movements were measured, purposeful. She wasn't in a hurry, wasn't looking for a dramatic flair. No, this was about something deeper, something much more dangerous. The defense lawyer stuttered, his confident smirk faltering as Jeanine stood, her silhouette now standing in stark contrast to the one they had all expected. The robe fell to the ground, and the air seemed to shift, as though the room itself held its breath. "Justice is not about what you see at first glance," Jeanine's voice rang out, low and steady, cutting through the silence. "It's about what you choose to see when you look closer." A murmur swept through the room. Something had changed, something powerful, something no one expected. The defense attorney's smirk faltered, then cracked, his composure beginning to unravel. Jeanine was no longer the woman they had mocked. She was someone else entirely. The courtroom was still, unnervingly still. Jeanine Pirro stood at the center of the room, her robe pooled at her feet like a discarded relic. But it wasn't just the absence of the robe that commanded attention. It was the change in the air, the undeniable shift that sent ripples of unease through everyone who had been so quick to mock her. Jeanine stood taller now, her posture straighter than it had ever been, her eyes sharp, laser-focused. The quiet was suffocating, the hum of disbelief vibrating through the room. The defense attorney stood frozen at his table, his once confident smirk now gone, replaced with a tight-lipped frown that could not mask his growing unease. He glanced nervously from the judge to Jeanine, as though expecting some kind of explanation. But Jeanine offered none. She didn't need to. Beneath the robe, she was no longer just a prosecutor. No, what the room was witnessing was far more than that. What they had failed to see, what they had failed to understand, was that Jeanine Pirro wasn't just another figure in a courtroom. She was a force that had long been underestimated, overlooked, and written off. But no more. Her tailored suit gleamed in the harsh light, its sharp lines and sophisticated cut a stark contrast to the casual mockery she had endured just moments before. And the look in her eyes, it wasn't just determination. It was something deeper, something far more dangerous. She wasn't just here to win a case. She was here to claim her place. The silence in the room stretched as Jeanine slowly stepped forward, the weight of her every movement settling over the jury like a heavy cloak. There was no need for her to shout, no need for dramatic gestures. Her presence alone was enough. A whisper ran through the room, first from the jury, then from the spectators. Who was she? Jeanine didn't speak yet. Instead, she turned to the judge, meeting his gaze with such intensity that for a moment even he seemed to reconsider his judgment of her. She had his attention now, his full and undivided attention. Then finally she spoke, her voice low, cutting through the air with chilling precision. "You thought I was just a prosecutor, didn't you? Someone you could dismiss without consequence. But the truth is, you never knew who you were dealing with." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their meaning. And as Jeanine paused, letting the silence build, it became clear. This was only the beginning. The game had changed, and Jeanine Pirro was no longer playing by their rules. The courtroom remained still, every eye fixed on Jeanine Pirro as she stood before them, a woman who had just stripped away her robes and her reputation as the underdog. But now, as her words echoed through the room, the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The whispers had stopped, replaced by an anxious anticipation, as if they knew something was about to unfold that they hadn't prepared for. As Jeanine's eyes scanned the room, her mind drifted for just a moment, back to a time when she was not just a prosecutor, but something far greater. Something that no one in this room could yet understand. The scene shifted, the courtroom fading away like a dream. In its place, a bustling office filled with polished wood and glass walls, an office that smelled of ambition and power. Jeanine, younger then, had been a rising star in the political world, a force to be reckoned with, not just in the legal realm, but on the national stage. It was a world of backroom deals, high-powered meetings, and endless pressure to perform, and Jeanine performed effortlessly. Her reputation wasn't built on courtroom victories alone. It was forged in the halls of government, in the arenas where the powerful played their most dangerous games. She had risen through the ranks, standing shoulder to shoulder with some of the most influential figures in the country. Jeanine wasn't just known for her prosecutorial skills. She was known for her ability to cut through the noise, to see the truth hidden beneath layers of corruption and deceit. She had been a rising star, a woman who wasn't afraid to stand up to the men in power. She had taken on high-profile cases, brought down corrupt politicians, and exposed deep-seated corporate fraud. But there were always those who tried to tear her down, to diminish her. The media had called her ambitious, even ruthless. Her enemies had tried to paint her as someone hungry for power, willing to do anything to climb higher. But she wasn't hungry for power. She was hungry for justice. As Jeanine sat in that office, preparing for a meeting with a major donor, she saw a side of the world that few had the stomach to confront. She had seen how the system worked, how people of power often protected their own, how justice could be manipulated, how the rules were bent to suit the whims of the elite. But Jeanine wasn't afraid. She wasn't afraid of making enemies, and she certainly wasn't afraid of what the courtroom would throw at her today. She had fought bigger battles, stared down more dangerous opponents, and now she was ready to bring that fight to this very room. The flashback ended. The weight of the past settled over her like a second skin, and Jeanine stepped forward once more. This was no longer about the case. This was about something far more personal. She wasn't just a prosecutor. She was a woman who had faced the highest of stakes and emerged victorious every single time. And today would be no different. The murmur in the courtroom had grown to a low hum, an undercurrent of whispered speculation that rippled through the gallery like waves crashing against the shore. Jeanine Pirro stood unshaken at the center of it all. The defense attorney, once so confident, now appeared rattled, his smug composure beginning to crack. It was a rare sight, one that sent a thrill through the room. This wasn't just a courtroom drama anymore. This was a battle of wills, and the momentum had shifted. Jeanine's gaze swept over the jury, her eyes steady and piercing. They were no longer just watching a prosecutor. They were witnessing a woman who had mastered the art of defiance, someone who had survived and thrived in the darkest corners of power. And in that moment, she knew the game had changed. The room was no longer filled with skeptics. It was filled with people waiting for the truth to come to light. The defense attorney, realizing his grip on the narrative was slipping, tried to regain control. His voice rose again, attempting to strike back with a new tactic. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, this time with a forced calmness, "you've seen what this woman is capable of. But let's not be fooled. Theatrics can only take you so far. We must ask ourselves, is this case about justice, or is it about a personal vendetta?" He turned toward Jeanine, his finger pointing accusingly. "Is it about settling scores rather than pursuing the truth?" A few jurors shifted uncomfortably, their gazes darting between the defense and Jeanine. It was a low blow, an attempt to paint her as someone with a personal agenda, someone too emotionally involved to be objective. But Jeanine wasn't flustered. She stood taller, unwavering, her presence only growing stronger. She had been in far worse situations, facing off against enemies who tried to discredit her with much more than petty insinuations. And every time, she had come out on top. She opened her mouth to speak, her voice low but carrying an undeniable authority. "A personal vendetta?" she repeated, her words like daggers. "You think I'm here for revenge? For some petty grudge?" She paused, letting the silence hang in the air like a challenge. "Let me make one thing clear. I didn't walk into this courtroom today because of anything personal. I'm here because I've seen this system fail too many times. I'm here because justice isn't just a word. It's something we owe to every person who has ever been wronged, who has ever been left behind." The room fell silent, each word landing with precision. The defense attorney's expression twisted into something that resembled frustration, but he was losing ground. Jeanine Pirro wasn't just a prosecutor anymore. She was the embodiment of everything the system was supposed to stand for. And now, with every word she spoke, she was tearing down the walls they had built around themselves. The unraveling had begun, and there was no turning back. The courtroom was no longer a place of order. It was a stage, and Jeanine Pirro stood at its center, not as a performer, but as the storm. The silence that followed her declaration in Part 6 was the kind that came right before thunder. And when she moved again, slowly, deliberately, it was as if the air shifted around her, charged with something undeniable. She walked to the evidence table and picked up a slim folder, the contents of which the defense had brushed off during pretrial hearings. "You ignored this," she said calmly, flipping it open. "Dismissed it as hearsay. But it's not. It's a statement from a whistleblower, an internal employee of your client's company, someone who risked their career to tell the truth." The defense attorney stood quickly. "Objection. We've already ruled that out." Jeanine didn't wait for the judge to respond. She turned to the bench, her voice commanding. "Your Honor, may I approach?" The judge nodded, wary now. This wasn't the woman he'd seen a few hours ago, quiet and unassuming. This was someone in complete control. The jury leaned forward in their seats, hanging on her every word. She handed the file to the judge. "This document connects every thread. It proves the financial fraud, the falsified reports, and the threats made to silence internal voices. It's not speculation. It's a confession, handwritten and signed. And it was hidden, buried under bureaucracy." The judge scanned it. His eyes widened, ever so slightly, but enough that even the jury noticed. A collective shiver ran through the room. Jeanine turned back to the jury. "They mocked me," she said quietly. "Said I was reaching, but I wasn't. I was digging through every lie, every buried file, every sealed drawer, because I knew what I was looking for was there, and now you can see it for yourselves." The screen behind her flickered to life. Jeanine had arranged a digital copy of the whistleblower's statement, along with the accompanying internal emails. Damning, explicit, undeniable. Gasps echoed. The jury's expressions shifted from skepticism to horror. Jeanine stepped back, her eyes sweeping across the courtroom. "You don't have to believe me," she said. "You just have to believe the truth." The thunder had struck, and nothing in that courtroom would ever be the same again. The jury filed back into the courtroom, their expressions carved in stone. Every breath in the room was held in suspension, as if exhaling might change the course of history. Jeanine Pirro sat perfectly still at the prosecutor's table, hands folded, gaze fixed not on the jurors, but straight ahead, into the weight of justice itself. The defense attorney, pale and twitching at the corner of his mouth, didn't say a word. He had run out of stunts, out of smirks, out of options. Jeanine had done what he never expected, pierced through the noise, outmaneuvered the arrogance, and let the truth roar louder than anything he could conjure. The judge, now visibly uneasy, looked down at the foreman. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." "In the matter of State versus Wexler International," the foreman began, "we find the defendant guilty on all counts." The words crashed into the courtroom like a tidal wave. Gasps, silence, then murmurs that buzzed like electricity. But Jeanine didn't flinch. She simply closed her eyes for one brief second, long enough to feel the moment settle in her bones, then stood. But she didn't celebrate. She didn't turn to the cameras now swirling in through the door or soak in the vindication spreading across the jury box. Instead, she walked to the bench where her judge's robe lay neatly folded. She picked it up, held it for a long beat, then slowly slipped it back on. This time, it wasn't just cloth. It was armor. She turned to face the room, not as a woman who had been mocked, not as a prosecutor, but as the Honorable Jeanine Pirro, the woman they had tried to reduce to a joke, only to watch her take apart the lie, brick by brick, in real time. The judge on the bench cleared his throat, perhaps sensing the poetic imbalance of it all. "Ms. Pirro, I'd like to say—" But Jeanine raised one hand, calm, graceful, unbothered. "There's nothing more to say, Your Honor. The truth has spoken." And with that, she walked out of the courtroom, not to applause, not to cheers, but to stunned silence. The kind that follows revelation, the kind that lingers long after footsteps fade. She had entered the room mocked. She left it legendary. They thought they could dismiss her, diminish her, discredit her. But Jeanine Pirro didn't come to play by their rules. She came to rewrite them. In a world that tried to silence her, she spoke louder. And in a courtroom built to break her, she rose and became unstoppable.